Malahat Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd also like to congratulate the member for Kelowna Lake Country on bringing forward this motion today. The motion before us, M177, is a motion of instruction to the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities to undertake a study of flight training schools in Canada, basically to identify the challenges that they are facing in providing trained pilots to the industry, but also to determine whether the infrastructure available to flight schools meets the needs of those schools and to the communities where they're located, and that hopefully this committee can report no later than 7 months from the adoption of this motion. Now, we in the 42nd Parliament does not have too much time left. We have 3 more weeks following this one before we go for Christmas, and then of course January to June. So I do hope that the committee is able to produce some recommendations, but it doesn't seem like it will leave much time for this government to act upon them. Also, I hope that the Minister of Transport, if he sees this as a worthwhile study, a worthwhile motion, pays attention to what the committee is doing and maybe can preempt them in a way to get his ministry, direct his officials in the ministry to pay attention to the witness testimony at that committee and to maybe preemptively act on some of the recommendations they're hearing from witnesses so that we don't need to wait until some of the significant recommendations. I also want to take the time to recognize the member for Trois-Rivières, who has been doing great work on the transport file for our NDP caucus. He sits as the second vice chair on the Transport Committee, and I know during the first hour of debate on this motion, he offered some substantive commentary on this motion, but he's also been doing some great work in other areas. And I was very pleased to see that member move an amendment to this committee which would have added a study on the effects of noise pollution on public health, because that's often a reoccurring issue with flight schools, but also that the government and specifically Transport Canada be more transparent in how it handles all of the data that was collected. Now, during the course of that first hour of debate, the member for Kelowna Lake Country did seem to indicate that he supported that amendment, and I hope he will continue to honour that. But nevertheless, if the motion does proceed to Transport Canada as was originally written, I'm still sure that there is plenty of room within the original wording to hear from people who are concerned with some of the negative impacts that flight training schools do. Now, speaking personally, Mr. Speaker, I don't have much direct experience with airplanes, other than being a member of Parliament who relies on Air Canada to get back to the amazing constituents of Cowichan and Malahat Langford. I try to do it every weekend. But, you know, there was a time in my life, a previous life, when I did a job as a tree planter. I did that job for 8 long years in the wilds of British Columbia, and I often had to rely on the service of some amazing helicopter pilots who would not only carry our trees up to blocks that were almost above the cloud cover, but would also transport us as the tree planters to get to our blocks. And the skill set of these pilots is really something to behold. I mean, most of us, when we see a helicopter flying, it's usually on pretty level ground, and they just take off nicely and off into the distance. When you're doing helicopter flying in the mountains of British Columbia with adverse weather conditions, low visibility, trying to place trees in a specific location on a sometimes very badly drawn map, and you've got a full load of tree planters with you, you not only have to drop those in a precise location, but these pilots often had to, with the rotors going full blast, just touch one of their landing rails on the side of a mountain while we all hopped off trying to get our equipment. So I can speak to the quality of the pilots that this country produces, and I can very much agree to the fact that if our flight training schools are producing that kind of a caliber of pilot, we certainly know that there's a great demand for it, but I think we can be proud of the job that our flight trainers do on behalf of this country. Now, in terms of the wording of the motion itself, what we're specifically looking for, we do acknowledge that there is a worker and labor shortage. Communities are very much in danger of losing air transportation service because private regional air carriers could curtail or even discontinue some regional connections. And of course, the main reason for this is pilot shortage. We know in terms of accessibility, Mr. Speaker, many communities in remote areas need air transportation service for medical and various other reasons, and studies show that airfares are far too high for regional markets. In fact, in February of this year, the NDP filed a complaint with the Competition Bureau to shed light on Air Canada's practices in the regions. The pilot shortage, I think, is going to drive up airfares and further restrict access to air service. And also, you know, the area of public health, I talked about this, but the repeated daily exposure to aircraft noise is a threat to the health of Canadians. We want the government to introduce more effective noise management measures for all airports, specifically those which have flight training schools, because the level of traffic is a lot higher, and instead of an aircraft just taking off and going to its desired destination, often flight training takes place in a very regional specific area, and they're often visiting the area multiple times. Now, if we look at the statistics, Mr. Speaker, they very much show to the need that is explained in this motion. Forecasts indicate that the industry will need about 7,300 new pilots between now and 2025, and currently fewer than 1,200 new licenses are being issued each year, and nearly half of those, 45%, are going to international students. So whether we're actually going to retain their services in this country is a big open question. And this, of course, is the source of this is the Canadian Council for Aviation and Aerospace. The Air Transport Association of Canada expects there to be a shortage of 3,300 pilots by 2025. And Boeing has indicated that the global demand is expected to be 790,000 pilots over the next 20 years, which is double the current demand. Now, if I look at my own riding, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of members in this chamber, over the last decade there has been an enormous increase in the number of low-flying training exercises being practiced over the tops of people's homes. It's an issue that I've become very well aware of as the local member of Parliament. Many residents are just losing their wits. And, Mr. Speaker, I just want to read into the record some of the emails I've received from constituents. I'll just quote one here from February 4th of 2017. I quote, "The last 10 years have been bad, but the last 7 years got even worse since a farmer near us cleared his trees and made a hayfield for these planes that found the near perfect practice field for their touch and goes and stalling their engines. So when they have to full throttle out of these stalls and starts, that will cause excessive noise, which is 10 times louder than when a plane just flies over us. It has ruined our quality of life here. We feel that our right as taxpayers this has to change as it is affecting our health. We have both been diagnosed with high blood pressure, and it is elevated from this constant barrage of excess noise from these airplanes." Another email, Mr. Speaker, from October 3rd of 2018. It goes on, quote, "I can't even begin to explain how bad the summer really was. 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. all day long, as they are here flying low, gunning their throttles over our homes to even make more purposeful noise. The thing that really gets me is that they are still intentionally hitting us hard, as they know we are trying to fight them off. It was so bad trying to torture us up here that they're going to kill or injure another person," and so on and so forth. And another one, Mr. Speaker, talking about how the constituent and his wife had to work today, but they keep on being woken up. So this is causing real pain and suffering to people who have bought homes in rural areas to enjoy the peace and countryside are being bombarded by these constant maneuvers. And I have raised this issue with the Minister of Transport. It's very much within the Minister's powers to designate new aerospace for flight training. And I think we have to look at the population growth in areas like Couch and Malahat Langford. When Class F airspace was designated decades ago, there were hardly any people living here, but our population has grown, and now we have these flight maneuvers going right over people's homes, often buzzing the tops of trees. So I hope this is an issue that the Transport Committee will look at the Minister's power to designate new aerospace, and I acknowledge the importance of training new pilots. But at the same time, we have to look at the quality of life of the people on the ground to make sure they are not adversely affected by our efforts to meet this growing demand. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll conclude, and I'm happy to be voting in favour of this motion. Thank you. Bravo.
Resuming debate, the parliamentary secretary for the Minister